Hello, and welcome to the Viva Connections and SharePoint Framework Biweekly Sync. It is May 5th, 2022. I'm your host on the call, Patrick Rogers, and we've got a great call for you. As usual, we'll get to our agenda here with the latest updates on the SharePoint Framework, patterns and practices, updates across the program, new community sample updates. We'll do our picture time with Together mode, and then we got three great demos from Adam, Marcin, and Hugo showing us managing data in OneDrive application folders, auto batching graph calls, and then SPFX design patterns. So really excited to see all three of those. So let's get through the intros so we can get to those demos. Often we get asked, how can I participate more in these calls or patterns and practices in general? And would definitely encourage anybody out there listening to reach out to us about doing a demo on these calls. I've always thought the demos are one of the most valuable parts of these calls, giving us a chance to all learn from each other. So I encourage you to reach out. I know you're all doing great work for your companies and your customers, and we'd love to be able to highlight that here. So make sure it's appropriate to share publicly, of course, and then reach out. We'd love to get you scheduled. It might be a few months out. Sometimes we are booked up, but you can always request a demo spot at aka.ms/m365pnp/request/demo, and we will get you signed up. You can always contribute on GitHub across all of the repositories associated with Microsoft open source, reporting issues, submitting pull requests, and of course you can help others with issues and questions they might have. And finally, we always welcome your feedback about how are these calls going, how's documentation, where can we help, and positive feedback is okay too, because if we're doing something you like, we can always try and do a little bit more of it. With that, tons of resources across lots of different areas. The one link you need to remember, ak.ms/m365pnp. That's the Patterns and Practices landing page that's going to get you directed to all of our developer videos. So those are topic-focused videos, more like kind of think of those as how-to videos to get you started on a range of topics. As well, we have our community videos. Those are going to be recordings of things like this call or other community calls, and other sort of event-based things will be in those community videos. We've got a bunch of open source organizations, PNP, Office Dev, Microsoft Graph, and SharePoint, that all welcome your contributions, your feedback, have opportunities to participate in various ways across all of those organizations. And then we've got tons of great samples across Teams, SPFX, ACES, adaptive card extensions, Power Platform, SPFX extensions, and list formatting. So you can find all of that. We'll talk about the unified sample gallery here in just a second. But instead of all those links, you can always just go to ak.ms/m365pnp, and you will get directed there to all of the various calls and various links. So these are a bunch of the other developer community calls available. M365 platform calls on Tuesdays. That's a Microsoft hosted call, and the rest of these are a mix of Microsoft hosted and community hosted. So I encourage you to check those out. But again, all of it, ak.ms/m365pnp for all the details. And speaking of the Unified Samples Gallery, this is a fantastic new resource, ak.ms/m365/samples, that gives you a roll-up, searchable, filterable list of all of the samples available across many different GitHub repositories. So instead of having to go hunt across GitHub, you could just find all the samples through this unified gallery here. It's really fantastic. Love seeing this get developed and out there. And it looks like there's more than 1,060 samples for Microsoft in the community, but just welcome you to check that out. Really great resource, rolling up tons of samples from across lots of different places, making it easy to find and get you started very quickly on helping to solve the problems you've got in your day and how to get started on your solutions. Microsoft 365 platform call is on Tuesdays. The next call is on the 10th of May. That's next Tuesday at 8 a.m. Pacific time. This is a Microsoft hosted call focusing on Microsoft presenters. And so next week we'll have Divyanka and Michelle talking about additional contextual actions in your extended app. And we'll have David talking about getting started on using Azure Communication Services in your website. So check that out, as well as all the latest news and info across the M365 platform for developers. So that's a great call to catch up on Tuesdays, and that recording, of course, with all the others will be available as well. And then with that, I'll hand it over to David for some info on sharing is caring.
Excellent. Thank you, Patrick. And you all may be wondering, where did those cornucopia of samples come from? They came from amazing individuals like you in the community. But you may be wondering, how do I get my samples in there? Or how can I further contribute into the community? Sharing is Caring is a program that provides you hands-on guidance in a variety of topics, such as contributing your samples, becoming more efficient as a presenter. Perhaps you'd like to get involved with using and or giving back to the existing samples that are there. These are live, safe space opportunities for you to interact with members of Microsoft, the Patterns and Practices team, and other members of the community. So we invite you to join any and all that you like. They are absolutely free, safe space, not recorded, so you can feel free to ask any and all questions you'd like. Next week on Monday is our Power Platform Samples First Time Contributor Session, and that is open and available. Still plenty of room for everybody. Got lots that are going to join that session, so don't hesitate. And we've got more AMAs coming up soon as they are ever popular and everyone is enjoying that interaction. Now, once you have contributed, we absolutely want to recognize all the amazing work you're doing, and so the recognition program is here to celebrate that. It is powered by Credly. Yes, the same Credly that manages the badges for all the Microsoft certifications, so they can be associated to your LinkedIn, shared on Twitter, put on your blog, shown to your clients and managers to show how much you're influencing the community. It is absolutely free. We do need you to opt in, and we just hit the beginning of a new month, so we'll be running some reports, and you're going to be seeing lots of new badges sending out to all of you for the amazing work that you did over the last month. Patrick, back to you.
Great updates there, and love seeing the growth of the samples and love seeing the growth of the recognition for that work. So wonderful work there by everybody involved, and congratulations to everybody who's gotten a badge. And I encourage you to get a badge yourself there if you haven't yet. So I'm Vasit today, so we're going to do SharePoint Framework updates. We've got SharePoint Framework 1.15 public developer preview is available. The big thing in there right now is the list form extensibility preview. Want to stress this is all preview, subject to change, not ready for production, et cetera, but definitely check it out. Exciting new capabilities to override list forms and take control of that experience in a way we haven't previously been able to in Modern. So excited to see that show up. And you can always install those at npm install-g at Microsoft/Generation Point at Next. We'll get you the preview version of that. So check that out. And of course, give us feedback on that. That's how we'll make it better prior to release. And the road ahead for 1.15, we're looking at new action types for media and geolocation. So a new tutorial is just out there for that. We got support for the Graph SDK v3. Excited to see that get in there. Bug fixes and adjustments based on GitHub issues. And then, as I mentioned, those new customizers for add and edit list and library forms. So some great capabilities in that preview for you to try out. Encourage you to do so. And we got a bunch of other stuff. I'm not going to read it all out. In progress for 1.15. So we'll be excited to see those things show up as well eventually. And then post 1.15, we're working on some bots-powered adaptive card extensions and support for Node v16. And that's delayed a bit just due to some dependencies internally that will get resolved shortly. Next up, PnP.js client-side library updates with Julie.
Hey, thank you. All right, so version 3.3 release is scheduled for May 13th. We don't have a ton. We did so much last month. I think we needed to take a big breath. We'll have some general documentation updates. We did get a new submission for a get locked by user file method. So that's going to be handy, and we will get that rolled into the 3.3 release. And so we'll address any other reported issues and enhancements as we go, but that's about all we have. Don't forget that any PRs that are merged in will end up showing up in our new nightly build. So if you go and install at pnp/sp at v3 nightly, and it'll have a date on the end of it. So go look at npm.js for the latest nightly date string. You can check out any of the new issues that were merged in and see if the fixes actually work for you. So that's a great way to test those out and give us early feedback before the actual release version goes out. So definitely check that out. Also follow us M365 PnP.js on Twitter. And that's all I have. Thanks, Patrick.
Awesome. Thanks, Julie, for those updates and all the great work, of course, on PnP.js by you and everyone else who's contributed. So thank you for that. I'm going to try and click through our animations there to get to the CLI for Microsoft 365 updates. We got new version 5.2 is out with extended SPFX project upgrade guidance to include SPFX Fast Serve. real tongue twister today. Upgraded SPFX projects to SPFX 1.15 Beta 6, simplified login, support for adding private teams, channels, and lots more. Encourage you to check out that new version of the CLI, a fantastic tool. If you haven't used it, you can install it there, or as well use the great Docker containers they've set up to make installing and using the CLI even better and easier. So definitely check that out with all those great new enhancements. Next up, some updates on the reusable controls. We've got 2 packages there. The React controls are at 3.8.0 with some people picker enhancements, adaptive card host enhancements, and support for section backgrounds and accessible accordion and tree view, as well as some various fixes. Those are designed to be used in the body of your web parts and application customizers. And then we've got the React property controls that are at 3.7.0. Those are designed to be used in the edit pane of your web parts. And we've got some updates around the property field list picker and the property field color picker. So I encourage you to update when you get a chance to the latest versions and enjoy all those enhancements. And thank you to everybody that's working on the reusable controls to make those better every week and every month. So thank you for that work. Next up is Modern Search, ak.ms/pnp-search, building flexible modern search experiences with web parts. 4.6.1 is out. That's the April release. You can see the full notes there at the link. I'm not going to read the whole link there to you, but you can see that, and that's going to give you all the updates. Thank you to everybody that helped update this, and that's going to give you the ability to build these fantastic, rich search experiences, super customizable within your portals for your customers and your companies. So definitely check that out. And just a reminder, the V3 branch of things is really just in long-term maintenance mode at this point. Not a lot happening there. Encourage you to update to the V4 branch when you have time. I know not everybody can drop everything and update search portals all the time, but at this point, definitely worthwhile to get onto that V4 branch of things. So encourage you to check that out. And then next up is Hugo with samples updates.
All right, so we have SPFX samples out there, both web parts and extensions. And these are the updates over the last 2 weeks. On the extension side, we don't have any new extensions. But on the web part side, we have 3 updates. One is Alex Terentiev has updated the page navigation web part to use SPFX 1.14. We have the awesome Teams meeting app questionnaire by Nandeep, who also updated to SPFX 1.14. I see a trend here. And finally, the star ratings by Takashi Shinohara, who updated the show average of stars instead of showing the user ratings. We welcome contributions. Again, if you don't know how to contribute samples, but you have some cool samples you want to share, please see us with Sharing is Caring. We're going to help you get started. Thanks to everyone who contributed samples. And speaking of samples, let's go talk to my friend David about ACES.
Awesome. Thank you, Hugo. At ACES, we've got a word of the day ace by Guido Zamborda. A very cool way to kind of share some of that information around new words, definitions, examples. Might even help you with your Wordle if you're doing that. So thank you again for the contributions. We are open for more. Don't hesitate. Patrick, back to you.
Well, I think I'm going to throw it back to you, David, because I think it's time for optional picture time. I think you've got Camtasia queued up. If folks want to turn their cameras on and join the picture time, this is the time to do so. So let's see if David could take over the screen there.
Yep. I am on it.
Lots of folks. Get the together mode going here.
I saw a Winter Classic jersey out there. There we go. Kind of coming in and out. That's pretty slick. All right.
Are we filling up?
Got a few more seats.
I'm going to threaten you all by turning my camera on if you don't hurry up and fill up those seats.
All right. I think we're getting close.
There's a ghost there.
Yeah, that's been a regular attendee lately. So, all right, let's give it some waves. Woo!
Right. Awesome.
Excellent. Very good. Thanks, everybody.
Great stuff. Thank you. I am just going to hand things over to Adam for our Manage Data in OneDrive application folder demo. If you want to go ahead and take over the presentation, you can get started.
Okay, sure. Hi, my name is Adam. I'm new here. Yeah, basically first time demoing, so I hope you will enjoy it as much as I can. I like coding and coffee. I'm located in Poland. Yeah, not much more to say. If you would like to contact me, you can do it via LinkedIn or Twitter. And anyway, if you are like using some of my open source and you have this idea, hey, maybe I will buy this guy a coffee, don't do it. Yeah, I work for free, at least in open source, I work for free. But in the current situation, maybe you can consider helping the ones in need. And there's a link for the verified support, how you can do it. It's not always charity, but also other stuff, and you're interested. And anyway, let's go back to the topic. So I will be presenting a subject, how we can save, let's say, personalized data. Let's say we have a really cool application we developed. And of course, in this SPFX application, we have some user personal data, some user settings that we want our app to be personalized and consistent. Let's say our application is in Teams and in SharePoint, and we want to, whatever we set in this SPFX web part in SharePoint, to see it also in Teams, and it's personalized for the current user. So of course we should save this kind of data, but maybe where, and maybe you already had this problem and considered it. Okay, we could consider Dataverse. Maybe it's more connected to the Power Platform and Power Apps. To be honest, I didn't develop a solution where I have an SPFX web part and I connect to the Dataverse. But okay, it is some point to keep the data for sure in this M365 world we can consider. Other thing I saw in the future and also created a couple of times this solution that we have some hidden SharePoint list on some SharePoint site, and then we keep each user's data in columns. And of course, there's many things we need to consider here, how we provision this SharePoint list. Maybe it can be provisioned by a separate script or with our SPFX package, or the web part could each time check, oh, if the list is present, if it's not, it creates it. And of course, we have to consider permission management here. At least the user who's the author of his row, he or she should be able to only edit this data, his or she's data, right? So there are a lot of things we need to consider. Other thing where we can save user personal data is in the user profile service. We can create a custom property, and we could keep those user settings as a custom properties. To me, seems this could seem a quite old school approach, maybe from the SharePoint on-prem versions. But okay, this is also something we can do. Not really sure if we can script this in SharePoint Online. And of course, we can consider saving data in user OneDrive. I think this is a really sweet place for user personal data. I mean, the user's, his or she's OneDrive is the place where the user stores their personal data. And of course, okay, we can say, okay, but in OneDrive I store mainly files, and here we should consider something like a structural object, like a table with some settings. Well, we can consider XML or better JSON, right? And there is a graph endpoint that supports all that. So there's not much work we actually need to do. We need to only like remember one or two, most of the times three endpoints gets and put how to save the data and how we'll actually present this now. So I hope you weren't bored with the slides, not much here. So this is my test user OneDrive. Okay, the test user is me. And I have nothing special here, but okay, using the Graph Explorer, let's see what will happen if I just do a simple GET request to this special me drive uproot endpoint. Okay, we'll see it's ended with a success, and it was translated to this kind of URL, which goes directly to my OneDrive, to a special apps folder. I didn't have it before, and here I see a Graph Explorer folder created. Okay, so let's go back, and okay, it actually happened a few seconds ago. The Graph for me created a new apps folder in the user's OneDrive. This is a special uproot catalog where each app which is using this endpoint will create their own folder for their own files, metadata, whatever. And in this Graph Explorer, I was using Graph Explorer, so I have a Graph Explorer folder created for me automatically. I don't need to provision it and think about anything else. And currently it's empty, so let's see how we can add anything here. We can do it with a simple put request. And I will save it as a test data JSON file, putting this as my content. And okay, if I refresh, I see that, okay, this file was created and this is my JSON file. So this is all well and good. If we will have a simple solution that we want to save the data, how we would now, let's say we want to retrieve the data for sure. So we can just query this single file, this single JSON file from this special uproot folder. We don't need to go to any subcatalogs. It will already be translated to the Graph Explorer folder in the uproot. And then we need actually to do an additional step, which I will show in the sample solution. We, as a response, we get the download URL, which will actually, if we open it, it will download our file. So in our web part, we can actually do the same and parse the JSON back to our TypeScript object. So it seems pretty straightforward and pretty easy, even comparing case to provisioning a SharePoint list with columns. Let's say in future we want to add additional metadata for the user personal settings, so we need to extend it with additional columns and stuff like that. Here we have a JSON which is really flexible, and we just, with a couple of 2 requests, we save it and get it, yeah, from the place we want. And okay, so maybe you could ask, okay, nice that you showed it, but these are only requests. Now I need to develop it. Well, there's a sample in the sample solution gallery. If you type save, there's the save to user application person folder. Maybe could be a better name. And this is actually a sample solution. I developed really easy one just to keep you up and started. And this whole layer of saving and getting data is kept in a separate SPFX component, a library. So actually here in this SPFX solution, we have a library in the web part. Web part is really easy one. I will show it in a while. It's just one client with 2 buttons to save and get the data. And this we could actually delete and create our own cool application and just leverage the things done in the library to manipulate with the data we want to save. And since Hugo added even a dev container here, it's just really easy to try it out. Let me see. So we can just have it running. We can just pull it and just have it running in the dev container already. And let's maybe see how it works first before I jump into the code. So I already have the GulpServe running, and this is my workbench. So let's just add this web part. It's called client. Beneath it uses this SPFX library I created, and let's just add a PNP demo, whatever. So I have a small JSON with 1 property data, which I saved to the PNP demo value. Okay, so let's see what happened. In the apps folder, I have a new folder which will be shared between all SharePoint SPFX solutions extensions, so extensions, web parts, whatever. And this is really important. So if we have an extension and then a web part and another web part, and all of those are using this Graph API to save our data, we'll all go to the same location. Those all solutions will go to the same location. So it's I think it's a good practice to have a separate subfolder. Here it's app data for this specific web part we are using now. So in this SharePoint Online Extensibility folder that was created automatically, I create in the library, I create a subfolder where I keep this JSON file, just in case that I would in the future have a different solution which would also save the JSON file with the same name. And okay, we see we have this small JSON saved. We can also use the get button to get our data. And of course, we can just update it and save, and then it's saved. Yeah, no magic here. So let's see in the code how it actually works. Okay, it's updated. So as I said, it's pretty straightforward. We have only 2 components, a library and a web part. We just type GulpServe on the web part, which will start our workbench. One thing really important also to remember that it is a Graph API endpoint, so it's defined in the web API permissions needed for it is defined in the library component. So if you are planning to use this sample or do a similar one based on this one, please do remember that after you use it, you need to go to the SharePoint admin portal and click on the admin consent for those permissions to make it working. Yeah, and then okay, this is the client. So this is the part of the web part, okay, actually, and as you can see, it's pretty straightforward. I have some really like simple UI logic with 2 buttons, and so here, of course, there could be some really cool solution. And we have 2 really small functionalities, get and save. And as you can see, it's pretty straightforward to get the data, retrieve it as a JSON, or save it where we pass any kind of TypeScript object we want to serialize to the JSON. The TypeScript object I created is updata. It's really easy. As I said, has 1 property, which can be anything. In our case, it's a string. And then this is the whole abstracted layer, which you could use if you want in sample, which is the library itself. It's we could think it's quite complex, but as you can see, there's not many code here, like 100 lines. And there are some predefined settings at the top. So what is the JSON name we will have, and the subcatalog we will be creating. And we have 2 public methods we can use in our web parts when we reference this library. One is a get data, which basically checks if the subcatalog in this automatically created catalog by graph is created. If not, it creates the subcatalog for us. It retrieves from the subcatalog this JSON file, gets the download link, and downloads it, and then parse the JSON to our object. And the save just does pretty much the same, but the other way around. It gets the object and parse it as a stream, and then we put it directly to the subcatalog. So first we query by the ID, and we save the content to the subcatalog. And pretty much that's it. I hope you liked my demo, and this is the first time. If I was boring you and fell asleep, or you're like me and you're more a reader person, it's always easier to copy paste from code or blog post, not from movie. Yeah. So I also created a blog post on the new GitHub community blog. So I guess it's quite easy to find it, and basically I try to explain the same concept I demoed here. So thanks for watching, and that's all.
Thank you. Awesome stuff, Adam. Really excited to see that demo. And next up is going to be Marcin with auto batching graph calls. You want to take over the presentation?
That is true. Hello, hello. Great to be here again. And to be honest, I'm even more happy because before me was someone else from Poland. So it looks like Poland is going to be next SharePoint superpower. I like it very much. Before I start, very quickly, we will talk about auto-batching graph requests in SharePoint Framework solution. Very quickly about me. I am Marcin. Here are my socials. As I mentioned, I'm also from Poland. The question I believe you all want to ask, why even implement auto-batching? And very quickly, Graph API has amazing ability to batch requests, which is great because you want to communicate with any server as little as possible. So if you can batch multiple requests into one, you're actually doing things faster. Amazing. Another point for auto-batching, this is effectively data access layer. So the optimal implementation, at least for me, would actually not expose any of the implementation details about the batching, but do it under the hood. And very quickly for the real world example, let's consider user card. If you want to render a simple user card, you have first of all, call graph to get user info, for example, /v endpoint. Then you need to get photo, and then you need to get the presence info for this card to be beautifully rendered. So those are 3 requests that actually can run in parallel. We can batch them together and send only once. Great. How would we do it? First of all, we will define an interface that will abstract our get, post, batch methods, effectively iHTTP client, and this will be our contract to Graph API. Then we will very quickly create an adapter from HTTP client, or actually AAD, HTTP client provided by SharePoint Framework, and we will map certain functions to our iHTTP client implementation. And finally, we will implement a very nice HTTP client that will aggregate our requests, put it on some queue, and every few milliseconds or a few hundred milliseconds, it will get everything on the queue, batch it together, send, and resolve the promises associated with the requests. I believe that makes sense. I cannot see anyone nodding or not. I believe you are nodding and sharing my approach to this. So to show you how it looks like, here we have very simple web part. We have two users. One is myself, Marcin. You can see that I am available, and this is my photo. And here is my test manager, which is not available and has no photo. Just to see what will happen is, as you can see, there is actually only one batch request which called the endpoints we needed. So it's me, presence, photo, manager, photo, and manager presence. The big question, how did we accomplish that? Let's dive into the code. I promised you we will see a HTTP client, which is a very simple interface. If you wonder why not use the contract provided by Microsoft with SPHTTP client, HTTP client, and AAD HTTP client, answer is very simple. I don't want to use the configuration object. And this is much more similar to Fetch API. So this is why I decided to implement it like this. We have two implementations of the client, as I mentioned. The first one is very simple, only AAD HTTP client. And when we are calling get, we are effectively just calling get from the HTTP client provided by SharePoint. We are only adding few headers. For example, for consistency level, if you're not too familiar with Graph, this is very, very important header. I highly recommend using that. For post, same thing, patch, put, no magic there. When it comes to batching itself, we have this batch graph client. And for batch graph client, I opted for composition, which you can see here. If you wonder why composition, I like composition because effectively this is inheritance with whatever base class you want. So very nice. What is happening? When we are calling get, we are actually returning new promise that will be resolved when we create get batch request. What's happening in get batch request? If there is no batch, so we have no requests queued, we setting a timeout, and we are in timeout callback, we will call generate batch. And batch wait time is effectively number of milliseconds. We will wait for to aggregate our calls. If there is already a batch, we will see if there is a batch for the same URL or not. If there is for the same URL, we will push new promise. If not, we will just add a new URL with new promise. So effectively what we are doing here is we are establishing one-to-one reference between the promise or the call from the code and batch that we will soon resolve. Then after a few milliseconds, we will call this generate batch. As I said, generate batch will somewhere here get our registered promises. We will split it to max acceptable batch length, which, if I remember correctly, is 15. So you can have maximum 15 numbers of different requests in one batch. So we will create batches of max number of 15. Get submap, it's effectively, we will get only the 15 promises we registered. Then we will create our batch handler and we will execute batch. What is batch handler? Nothing too difficult. Our batch handler just gets the registered promises, gets the URL from each promise, and builds somewhere here it builds somewhere batch body. Oh, I believe that's it. Map request URL. Once we build the body, we execute request and we process the batch response. You can see here that we are checking the version because there is separate batch for v1 and separate batch for v2. If you call some endpoint, for example, v endpoint in beta version, you may call it because it gets you more data. You cannot batch beta version endpoint in v1 batch. This is why we have two batches, one for beta, one for v1. Request batch, we will have our response, and then we will just process response. Process response works very easily. What it does, it finds the response associated with URL of registered promise. If it's got throttled, it will try again. If not, it will just resolve the promise we had stored in the map. So that's it. Now the big question is how you can use it. Let's check our auto-batching web part sample. First of all, we get the graph client using AAD HTTP client factory. Again, if you wonder, Marcin, why wouldn't you just use MS Graph Client? Because I like the fetch API a little bit more. I believe it's more, let's say, consistent. Then we are creating new batch graph client, and this is the client we will use in our auto batching sample. Let's check out how. We have one user card in two user card. We provide graph client and the user query we want to use. And finally, the user card. And that's what we're looking for. We are resolving 3 promises at all with very simple API because we just call get. Whole batching is happening underneath. So it looks like we have 3 different requests, but under the hood, they are batched into one. We resolve them all, and we are rendering personal object from Fluent UI with user data, presence, and of course, photo. Now for the, I believe, last part, something I'm a big fan of, unit tests, because as you may imagine, due to the number of requests, set timeout, read-only operations, there is a lot of logic we should be able to test. So how we can test something like this? With Jest, of course. So here, let's say we want to test very simple batch request. We will create a simple mock for base client, create batch request based on this client. Note that here I will say, okay, the only response that this base client will have is a response from post that will have a specific ID, and for the second request, this is batch for the request 1 and the request 2. We call it, awaiting it, and we can very easily check that, oh, actually, yes, I executed the post request with batch. I returned test user for me and test group ID for my group. And there are a few other tests which help you out, for example, with testing the throttling or something like that. I will not go too much into details here. I highly encourage you to download the sample, play around with this, and optimally give me some feedback. And finally, because I know the web parts are now passé, You can use the same thing in adaptive cards as well. Here you see a very simple adaptive card, my name, my presence, my photo. Again, in the same solution, I believe adaptive card extension, that's it. We initialize it in all effectively the same way. We are getting the client from AADHT factory for graph. We are using the same batch client, and we just set to our, this time, adaptive card state, user, user presence, and photo. Everything is batched together, and effectively there is only one request to graph. I would say in adaptive cards, or in adaptive cards in general, that's much more important than in web parts, because you can get throttled. I believe if you have 15 consecutive requests to graph, about 15 or 9, something like this, it's not a big dumper, you will get throttled by graph. So especially on adaptive cards, when you still don't have that nice async option or async opportunity to get card details, you have to load everything at once. Batching is so much important to avoid throttling. And I believe that's all from my side. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. I see a comment complexity 95. Yes, but I believe this is only because I went through this so fast. As I said, I highly encourage you to check it out on your own. I've even been told it works quite well with React Native. So it's, I would say the implementation is quite cross-platform. 43. So yes, I believe that's it from my side. It was a pleasure. Have a great day and see you soon.
Awesome. Thanks so stuff, Marcin. Really cool pattern there with the auto batching, and definitely the performance implications are big with batching these requests. So encourage folks to kind of check out that sample and those patterns and see how you can best incorporate them into your applications. And with that, we're going to move over to Hugo, who's going to walk us through some custom properties part 6. Take it away.
Awesome. Thank you. First of all, I'd like to say that I could probably just stay and watch about unit testing forever. All right. So yes, like Patrick said, this is part 6. We've been talking about custom properties and design patterns. And the one thing we want to talk about here is we want to make sure that when we're talking about design patterns here, we're not just showing you how to use code, but how to design applications that your users will fall in love with and that your users will find beautiful and easy to use. After this session, we're going to move away from custom properties finally, because we're going to have more sequels than the Fast and Furious at this pace. And we're going to start talking about content. But today, let's focus on custom properties. My name is Hugo Bernier. I work at Microsoft. I'm a senior cloud solution architect at Microsoft. And you can see my blog here on my Twitter account. But just one thing, my blog is currently down under maintenance because we were so busy building the new Microsoft 365 community blog that I neglected my own blog. But we'll be fixing that very shortly. All right, so let's recap a little bit. So far, we spent most of our time on property panes. And again, the reason for that is because we want to make sure that your web parts are configured properly and they're reusable, right? We don't want to create single-use web parts. We want to create reusable web parts as much as possible. And we want to make sure that we bound properties to property pane controls and how to validate them. Now let's do a little recap here on how we validate. So here on this web part, we have kind of 2 validations that are built in. One is the field is required. And 2 is if I put like a really long description, it'll say, hey, it shouldn't be longer than 40 characters. So those are 2 validations, right? And let's do a little refresher on how we do the code for that. So the first thing that we do is on your web part, so in this case, my-webpart.ts, you have a method called getPropertyPaneConfiguration. And all we need to do is we need to actually pass the individual fields that we want and bind them to the individual properties. And how we get the validation is by passing on get error message, where we're going to pass it basically a string, and it'll return a string. And a string, if the string is empty, it means there's no error message. If the string has something, it means there's an error, and it will be displayed. So the validate description is very simple, right? And it's probably not the best code here, but again, I was trying to make it as simple as possible. The first thing is if the value is null, or if it's been trimmed and it's null, then we say, please provide a description. If the value is greater than 40, or the length of the value is greater than 40, we say, hey, please don't make it too long. And then if else, we just return nothing. Now we go back again to that web part and we look at that validation here. Let's do that. Now we have a list web part, and the list web part, sorry, not a list property, a list property, where we ask people to enter the list name. And you'll see here, as I'm typing, it's starting to scream at me saying, hey, this list doesn't exist. All right, well, let's actually talk about how we want to handle this. And the best example that I like to use when I talk about user experience is those fancy ATM machines, right? Or I guess I should just say ATM, where you can go get cash, right? And you can withdraw cash out of the machines. Now, the typical user interface, and this I actually took this from a local bank and I rebranded it. But typical ATMs will allow you to enter an amount or allow you to pick from choices. And then, so I'll start typing, right? I'll take $53.75. And I'll say, oh, invalid, right? Because you can't put decimals in the amount that you want to take out. So, okay, I'll just change that. I'll enter $50. And I'll say, oh, no, sorry, only multiples of 20 are accepted. And it'll continue like that, kind of screaming at me until I get it right. But the one thing we want to make clear is that when users are being faced with error messages like that, that's really what they see is something like this, where it's like, why can't you do anything right? And there's a reason why people have a tendency to not to like computers, is because they tend to feel stupid when they use computers. So one of the design patterns that we'll talk about today is how to not make our users feel like garbage by using some code and by using some user experience. And the first thing is avoid the error from happening in the first place. And when I was looking for images here, I was actually going to put a picture of Bruce Lee, where he used to say the best way to never lose a fight is to not fight in the first place. But let's just use this one for now. So the first rule is don't create opportunities for people to have errors, right? So if you think about that ATM experience, why did it allow me to enter decimals in the first place when all I can do is then withdraw increments of 20? And let's look back at our example of validating the description, just to show a parallel here. So if I go back to my description here, and it says I can't enter anything longer than 40 characters. Well, that's an opportunity right there for errors that doesn't need to be there. Because what I could do is we can actually go to our property pane, and right here, we can actually say that the length, max length, is 40. That way, I mean, I really don't need to have the validation that exceeds greater than 40. But, you know, let's remember from our last session that you should always also validate stored values, not just entered values, right? So I always try to keep my validation there, even though I'm going to try to prevent the users from making that mistake. Okay, but now let's go back to our list, right, where we enter the list names. And I'm sure you folks have never had this issue, but I run into this issue all the time. Should I be entering the display name? Should I be entering the, you know, the escape name? Am I entering the GUID? You know, do I put a slash in the name? You know, there's all sorts of things that I don't know what to do. And again, it makes me feel inappropriate as a user, right? It's like, why can't I get this done right? And then we'll give a message like this, right? The list test doesn't exist on the current site. Now, this is where it's a good idea to use some help. And one of the things that you should look at is the PnP SPFX property controls library, which has tons of reusable property pane controls for your SharePoint Framework solutions that you can use to do some really cool stuff. And so let's just look around. We've got some controls here, tons of controls, as you can see, for editing code, for picking colors, dates, and things like that. And we'll review those a bit later. But the one I want to use is the list picker. And the list picker allows me to actually list lists on my site so that I can, validate the list properly. And so it's got every single control has the full instructions on how to use a control, and it's mostly copy and paste. So the first step is to go back to my library and to add a dependency, right? And we'll do that by saying npm install, and then we'll copy the @pnp, and it's SPFX. I usually type way faster. Property controls. All right. Okay, and we'll hit enter. And then if everything goes well, we'll get the library installed. Now, we go back to our web part, and we'll actually just need to add a new import just so that this web part knows how to use the property field list picker. And we'll also add a property because we need to store our list. Now, the sample actually allows you to store both a multi-select list or a single list. In my case, I want a single list, but if I made this an array of strings, I could have multiple lists stored here. And then if we go back to how we add a property pane control, it's the same thing that we've done before, except now I'm using a different control that comes from this library. And if you're wondering, where did I get the code? I just copied and pasted the code right from the instructions. So copy this, paste it here, and then I'll just do a little bit of customization, right? So I'll update the label. I'll actually tell it what property I want to bind to. If I want to, I can actually have it include the hidden list versus the non-hidden list, and how we sort and things like that. But then what we want to do here is there's a few other things like, do I want to bind when the property field is changed, and some elements that the control is going to need to be able to actually execute. And then this is where my error message validation comes in, where I can decide whether I picked a list or not. And then in my validation, I'll just do something like this. If I didn't get a value, or if I got, and this is probably a little ugly, but it's a hard-coded value that is no list selected, then I'll say, please select a list. Otherwise, I'll just return no error message. And so now we're going to get something like this, where I can pick the list. Now, let's just be clear that the list that I see here is the list that I have permissions to see. Right? So we want to make sure that if you're doing things on behalf of the user, users also have access to the list. And that's really how the validation is done. Now, we could do the same thing if you are entering colors or entering dates or things like that, or even fancy things like selecting people, or even entering JSON or HTML or things like that, right? If you've ever tried to type JSON in Notepad without syntax highlighting, it can get out of hand a little bit. So anything like this helps reducing the number of errors. But now let's just do some rapid fire here on some design patterns we want to use. The first thing we want to do is we want to make sure that we are polite, always polite when we give error messages, right? So if I go to that web part again, or a sample web part, and we have, let's say, a description field, and we don't want to scream at users and say, hey, you didn't enter a description. That's just not cool, right? We want to make sure that we're polite and we say something like, hey, please enter a description. That's way better. But we also want to be as precise as possible, right? We don't want to give generic error messages if we can. If we know what's wrong, let's actually tell our users. So for example, if we say enter an email address, we can't just say invalid email. That's just not cool, right? So maybe what's better is to say something like this. Hey, please enter an email address with the format name@example.com, right? That is better because it tells our users exactly what we're expecting. But maybe I have another type of message, which is like, hey, please don't use a work or school email address. Or something like maybe it's an error message that's coming from the backend. And maybe we can say, oops, I can't verify the email right now. Please try again. So you see here, I'm trying to be as precise as possible with my error message because I'm telling the user exactly what is wrong and how to correct the behavior, or in some cases, please come back later. Well, we'll try to validate it. The other UX rule that we always want to make sure is that you want to reduce the work that's required to fix the problem. So an example of this is if it's asking you to enter a username. Let's just go do that quickly. And I enter a user. I don't want it to just like invalidate the error, like the field, and then say invalid user, right? A better user experience from this is maybe I mistyped it. Or maybe I copied and pasted and there was a space or something like that. So instead, keep that user there and say, please, I can't recognize that username, or that, you can be fun with it. You can say, hey, this user exists. That's really scary. All right. We also want to make sure that we show where the errors happen. And, where that's important, I'll just go quickly here because I want to make sure that you see this. But if you've got like multiple steps in your web property pane, and you've got validation across the panes, your users are not going to know, hey, I could have sworn I entered something that's valid here, right? And so please don't do cross-pane validation. Try to validate in the spot. You want to validate as soon as we can, obviously, but probably the one thing that we want to make sure that we do here is we want to make sure that we're flexible. So for example, if we enter a phone number, don't scream at people because they have a space or they have something like this. Like, you're expecting a phone number. You can probably trim all the spaces, all the invalid characters, and validate from that. Try to be as flexible as possible. Because remember that your users will remember the pecan rule, which is we'll pay close attention to the most intense point in our user's journey. And users will remember negative experiences more vividly than the positive ones. So don't give them the opportunity to feel bad, because they're just going to remember that way more than the cool web part you built. And more importantly, be careful with your error messages, because this is a real site. You don't want error messages like this where you reveal bad information. All right, that's it for me. Thank you, everyone. Next time, we'll talk about web part content.
All right, thank you, Hugo, for that. But want to thank Adam, Marcin, and Hugo for those great demos. Really interesting stuff. Always love seeing all the demos. So thank you for that. And with that, I'll say thank you to all of you for joining us here on the call today. Recording will be available in about 24 hours on the community YouTube channel, aka.ms/m365/videos. Encourage you to check that out. Catch up on any calls you may have missed. You can follow us on Twitter. Our next Viva Connections and SPFX call will be in 2 weeks on May 19th. At the same time, our next general dev call will be on May 12th. At the same time, that is next Thursday. For a list of all the calls, you can check out ak.ms/m365/calls. And with that, thank you very much. Everybody have a great rest of your week, and I'm sure we'll talk soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.